I know that we don't have all the panelists up yet, but I just want to, so that we have some efficient use of time. I'd just kind of get a sense of how you all, what kind of interest, what kind of scientific aspects that you all are interested in hearing, so I can kind of help direct conversation a little bit. Because this panel is basically is the same panel as we did yesterday with pharmacology. Now, as I was saying, pharmacology is a science, the last I checked, right? And so I want to kind of see what everybody's interest, what they would like to get out of this panel. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to talk a little bit about nano-emulsified oil, if you guys think it's worth it.
Okay, good. Okay, so more on the chemistry and the physics side of things.
Is that okay?
No, that's good. No, we've got.
That's science to me.
We have two basically chemists up here.
Okay.
So we've got that side covered, the basic science side, if you will, right, and the application side. Then we also have Dr. Conan and me, which is more clinical based. So that's the kind of stuff that we can talk about, such as clinical applications, with disease processes, insomnia, pain, inflammation, epilepsy, drug interactions, so that's the.
I think drug interactions would be really helpful.
Okay.
We could reverse it too. We could start with Q&A if you want.
Okay, you know what? That might actually be. I like that idea, because at the end of the day, we want to talk about what you guys want to know about. Not us, just hell. We can keep on going. Yeah. We know that. Okay, we can geek out all day long. Yeah, let's do just. You know what? Let's just open it up. Open it up.
I'm going to have a mic runner here.
As long as there's no eggs flying around, I think we're okay.
No, I got a gentleman for me right now. I'll run it to the inside.
All right, well, let's get started. And you mentioned the nanoparticles and emulsification. You know what? Let's give it to our chemist / physicist / pharmacologist and let him go with it.
You want to?
Yeah. You go ahead.
What would you like to know about nanoemulsions?
Do you recommend it for oil?
I do. So CBD, cannabidiol, has a molecular weight of 314.47. It is classified the biopharmaceutics classification system as BCS class 2. And if you look at all of the last 60% of the pharmaceutical compounds on the market, they're all classified as BCS class 2, which means these molecules have a very low water solubility, like CBD, and a very high permeability, like CBD. CBD is also, its efficacy is through these G protein coupled receptors, CB1, CB2, that we've all heard about. Predominantly, we ask the clinicians. It seems literature supports that CB2 is where most of the activity for CBD lies into. I think there's still a lot of research that needs to happen. CBD is also crystalline. It's not an amorphous molecule. And if you look at the energy states of crystalline molecules need a lot more energy to absorb in the body. So I think from a drug delivery strategy perspective, how do we get CBD in the body? There's a lot going against CBD as a molecule to absorb in the body. And I think a lot of us are starting to understand that because the literature shows that CBD, when dissolved in an oil, does not absorb very well in the body. I've seen as little as, 6, 7, 8%, as high as 20% in oil. Even though CBD is soluble in MCT, which is the primary form of all of the products out there, if you're ongoing today, which is what early in 2020, the FDA asked industry leaders to provide data sets that support whether CBD is safe or not. because the drug product Epidiolex from GW Pharmaceuticals, they showed that liver toxicity was observed at a high dose, which was at 20 milligrams per kilogram, which is a really high dose. However, toxicity was observed. So part of this valid care study is to understand, in the real world conditions, over 1,000 patients, if CBD causes toxicity. From a drug delivery perspective, this is why we like nanoemulsions. And nanoemulsions allow you to, one, have a much lower dose that you can provide a consumer or a patient and get the same impact as using proprietary surfactants or non-GRAS excipients. And how do you have a label claim that is consumer friendly? So there's a lot that we could talk about nanoemulsions. I'd love to. It's what we're very passionate about, so we could talk as much as you want about it.
Yeah, I love it. You touched on a lot of points, and one of which is actually the liver toxicity and the drug interaction, which relates to the drug interaction that you want to ask about. And let me just put my 2 cents in there, which is the primary site of metabolism for CBDs in the liver. It activates the cytochrome what we call the cytochrome P450 system, which is used as is the primary liver mechanism to detoxify drugs. I mean, that's how they inactivate it and excrete it. Okay, and because of that it uses that particular system, it activates it rather, that it has a lot of potential drug interactions. In particular, the ones that the Epidiolex studies, showed was, in particular, it's the anti-epileptics, Tegratols, Depakotes, and all that stuff. And it also applies to the other, even antibiotics, certain antibiotics, like azithromycin. And so this is where you have to be careful, and that's why the FDA is as interested in this as they are. It's really it's not about necessarily about the effects, it's about the potential toxicity and the drug interactions. Perfect another example is you get a transplant patient who's on cyclosporin, you give him CBD, guess what? That cyclosporin level is going to go up. And next thing you know, you could have a potential problem. And that's why the FDA is on this.
So are you saying that the drug interaction happens in the liver? So would it be safe to say a nanoemulsified oil should be healthier for your liver, right?
So what I think, again, I'm going to direct it back to you guys. This speaks to the degree of absorption in different formulations. The study that gets approved by the FDA, the one that everybody talks about, is the Epidiolex study. It's the CBD concentrate that is used to treat pediatric seizures. They used that 20 milligram per kilogram, 40 milligram, but they used a very standardized, formulation. And I'm not 100% sure how they formulated that one, but obviously that's a big dose. The question is, can you get the same amount of absorption in your system by using a different formulation, such that the body, you give a X whatever emulsion at a lower concentration, but yet it gets absorbed in the system enough that it gets the same effect. That's, I think, is what you all are talking about. And so I'll want to do that.
So I'm just going to pick up from where it's been talked already. Completely agree with everything you guys said, and your questions are very valid. At this point, when we're developing new nanotechnology, somebody asked me yesterday, Olivia, she's probably here, why not like people start buying nanoemulsions instead of everything else if you all claim that's better? Well, it is, definitely. The way of absorption works totally different than tinctures or edibles or whatever. But the whole point of like controlling your dosage, there's also the side of the coin that uncontrollably use. You know, like I can probably chug a liter of a nano emulsion and have a lot of toxicity in my body because I don't know what I'm doing. And there's a lot of people that can possibly do that. So there's markets for everything. You know, like whether you try a nano emulsion and you think it works best than the tincture you've been doing, but then other people might not like the flavor of it. Other people might not like the effect that the onset is so quick that I might need it in 2 hours or so. So everybody will try these nano emulsions and decide if, yes, it's a better option or no. I'll stick around with my gummies or my tinctures or whatever, just because they like it that way and it works that way, you know? But the fact that we make these new products is because we see that there's a potential for them. There's activity that we do studies for all that, and we figure out that they work sometimes better than others. That doesn't mean that it's going to break the whole market. It's just going to have its own niche and really a very specific market of people that understand how it works, and they prefer to use that type instead of others. I mean, I don't think really we're going to stop doing gummies or stuff that people like or even just love it, you know? So there's a market for everything. So I would say, yes, these new developments that we come up or we just start like making are sometimes they portray to be a breakthrough for us scientists. We believe in it. We think it's a breakthrough. But then again, the market is so broad and it's just barely going up, you know, like it's just picking up, at least in Texas, it's just picking up. So whatever we come up with next, I mean, next year, probably come up with something new. We come up with something new, and then everybody's gonna ask the same question. Why don't we just drop your nanoemulsion and we go with your new product? Like, well, I guess because people love the nanoemulsion now. So there's many things that we can tackle in there, but there's a market for everything. So anybody?
And the therapeutic promise of CBD, I mean, it's there. So when we look at CBD, and I really like to get Jeff's perspective from a clinical standpoint, is CBD and majority of drugs will metabolize through the liver. You know, it's just like what enzymes Dr. Chang said it was the CYP4 P450, which is very common enzymes that most of our prescription drugs will metabolize the drugs that we consume. So if you look at all the clinical studies at clinicaltrials.gov, majority of the studies are actually looking at drug-drug interaction. So like this is where Epidiolex, this is where a lot of universities are starting to, they want to understand that what other drug products that, you know, the geriatric population's consuming to, you know, people our age, you know, what is safe and what is unsafe. And, you know, why we like nanoemulsions, and nanoemulsions isn't the only way to bypass the liver. I mean, there's other formulation strategies to overcome the liver. Like if you could preference more lymphatic uptake, which is, studies have shown that certain nanotechnology does preference lymphatic uptake, you could bypass formulations can be mitigated significantly. And I think this should really look at what is the clinical use of CBD, how are athletes consuming these products. I mean, are these athletes, they're already taking a lot of supplements, their liver may be compromised or may be really healthy. So it'd be really good to get Jeff's perspective on, since he has the experience with athletes.
Yeah, this is really interesting because to me, in the world that I work and live in, nanoemulsion is an urban dictionary term that hasn't yet hit. There's no discussion about it. When I get calls or emails to speak at conferences on sports medicine topics, it's, can you come speak on CBD oils? System. Do you want to know about CBC, CBG, anything else? They're like, what's that? So I think you made a point, which is really important in our world, is that when I finally am able to cross some level of minimal education on what CBD is, because that's the buzz term to them, when they figure that out, we're going to be talking about other terms. So it's going to be an ongoing transition. The real issue is the decision on what to use from this standpoint. Healthcare providers aren't making the recommendations. Liability-wise, they're concerned of what to recommend because they're unsure. And they're unsure because of the nature of who you're working with. So for example, I could tell you that if I'm working with a professional player that makes $2-3 million a year, my own personal liability insurance doesn't even go that high to cover it if I make an error and I get sued. And that would be the general concern. That's just 1 year. What happens if this person decides to sue me over lost career earnings? I'm done. But nowadays it's even worse. You have a 14-year-old kid who has potential, and they come after you because they lost their potential scholarship in something else. So everyone's afraid to offer advice in our world right now until we have a little more understanding. So as an example, last January, Major League Baseball came out with a surprise statement and said, we're no longer going to drug test. You can put anything in your body if you want right now. But they didn't give a single bit of warning to the providers who are going to be treating these players, to the medical or legal team of how this affects you, or to the players, most importantly, about educating them on this. And that was last January. So we're creeping up on 12 months now, and there's still been no change. And COVID's taken over what is important to them to talk about right now, obviously. And what you're really seeing, which is really interesting, you're seeing an open receptiveness to accepting CBD, if you will, as a sponsor now to teams. Sponsorship doesn't mean the teams use the product, right? But they would have never a year ago taken the money for the sponsorship to be associated with it. But because of the pandemic and because there's no fans buying tickets, there's nobody paying for the parking spots when they show up or buying jerseys or buying beverages and food, they need money right now. So they're opening up their eyes. And this, unfortunately or fortunately, this might be the way in to educate them on more than just CBD oil, on the clinical interaction end.
Great. I want to again see what your questions are. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, now that I understand a lot more about CBD and the benefits of it and the parts of it, I just want the most basic explanation you can provide about the natural form versus CBD. How far is that from the natural, like earth-grown form of hemp?
So I'll field that question, in the sense, CBD as we currently have it is mostly derived from the natural hemp plant. And the hemp plant, yes ma'am.
Can you expand on derived?
Okay, so we'll has hundreds of cannabinoids. The two biggest ones that we all talk about is obviously THC and CBD. That, depending on the hemp plant, that may be up to 80-90% of the total cannabinoids. But the last we checked, there was about 113 cannabinoids that's within the hemp plant in various concentrations. And CBD is just one of them. And the way we get CBD, at least currently, is through the distillation of the hemp from the natural hemp plant, and then to extract that component out. And so maybe the gentleman, maybe Michael or Israel, they have experience in the extraction side of things.
Right.
That's why it's
So
called extraction.
we are BioCity Hemp, so we have a booth there. You can actually stop by with us, and there should be somebody, or I can do it now, but it's a long conversation. I'm gonna try to make it as brief as possible. So we actually get biomass, that's the way we call it, which is the flower, like harvested already. We get it on our site. We grind it down to a very fine size that we can actually first put it on an oven to do a process which is called decarboxylation. So this plant already contains all the cannabinoids that, genetically speaking, were like produced by the plant. Most of the time, hemp will contain CBD in its majority, probably another cannabinoid, which is CBC, THC, and other minors, CBN, CBDA, you name it. But you get a characteristic flower hemp that contains all those, and then after you decarboxylate your cannabinoids, that's why you start calling derived from the hemp plant, because we take it and we treat it in a certain way, that we can finally get crude oil, as we call it. We pass it through different steps of extraction, winterization, removal of solvents to finally do a distillation and get the crude oil. This crude oil contains most of its contents is CBD at a high percent, like 80 or above. And then the other components, of course, increase in percentage because you basically make them a concentrate of all of them, right? So once you get them at that point, then you have like an oil that contains all the cannabinoids, but in its majority is CBD. Now, that's the CBD that you probably see on vapes, or they use for make gummies, or they use for all these other products. So, of course, based on whichever plant, hemp plant, you get, the variety of cannabinoids that contain this plant could change in percentage. So, not a single oil is going to be the same from one plant to another.
I have to admit, I have to correct myself. I mentioned THC, it is not. In order for it to qualify as hemp, the total concentration need cannot.
That refers to the original plant, the
Yes.
original biomass.
So when I get biomass on my site, if I don't get a certificate of analysis stating that the THC content is below 0.3, I cannot accept it in my site because then it's illegal for me and I cannot process it.
That's called marijuana, and that's not legal in Texas yet.
And you guys might know this, I can't recall, but if you trace back in time where the 0.3 came from, is an original article from a couple of decades ago that actually wasn't based on the science of any kind. It was a proposed number that was put out there, and it just kind of caught on and became law.
And and that opens up a discussion regarding standardization.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing standardized about hemp and CBD is THC concentration. So when we look at the longevity of the market and how like this market's maturing, you know, what I really like what GW Pharmaceuticals is doing, and they have billions of dollars to spend on this, is that they are standardizing what full spectrum, broad spectrum, you know, what defines that. So and this is where I think extractors need to really step up their game, is that if they don't standardize their extraction, like that end product, whether it's a crude, a distillate, full spectrum, broad spectrum, I think that's significant market risk because you can't call it a dietary supplement with isolates because it is standardized. I mean, a specification on a C of A for isolate, like at least the good stuff, is going to be no less than 99% weight by weight. Mm-hmm. Therefore, that is standardized. You can formulate with it. You know what you're putting in your formulation. You know what you're getting out of your formulation. You know what your body should ingest through pharmacokinetic studies. And you know, stability is much more defined. How do you run a stability program on a broad spectrum extract? And what are we looking at? Are we looking at multiple cannabinoids? Are we looking at these other phytochemicals? Are we looking at the terpenes over time? So I think the extractors have a lot to do over the next 24 months to really ensure this industry is safe.
Because after you extract it, you have to begin to think about, okay, if we want to make certain compounds, how are we going to put it back together with using the least invasive ways to put it back together to make more standardized and still pure, compounds of what was extracted.
So one point that it's fair to remember, if you'll go back and read the Farm Bill that just passed in 2019, on there it says the limit of THC needs to be below 0.3 by dry weight. That means biomass. It doesn't state anything else related to oil. So technically speaking, you shouldn't care what's the content of THC on your oil, because as long as you have it below 0.3 on your biomass, you should be fine. But as a down, although it clearly reads in dry mass by weight. So the oil is not dry mass, right? So technically speaking, we are just going by what we learn, but it really a conversation about delta 8. You know, like people said that it's a synthetic from, or another says it's a derivative. Well, technically speaking, you wouldn't be able to sell CBD if you don't decarboxylate CBD. And that's a transformation. That's a chemical transformation. So technically speaking, you would only be able to sell CBDA, and that's it, because you cannot touch, chemically speaking, any of these compounds. So there is a lot of vague areas in this field that we're trying to make the best of it, just because we try to align with that 0.3, but really, technically speaking, they shouldn't be able to do anything against us if we deliver with higher content of that. But that's the problem now in the market, because technically speaking, anybody can deliver CBD oil with whatever content of THC, and nobody would be able to tell them anything because it's not restricted, you see?
Has anybody tested that limit as far as that threshold just yet? Any company out there that's tried to test that limit?
Going
over that 0.3?
Oh, there's a lot of people like delivering products with more than what it's supposed to be.
Okay.
Because right now there's not.
You do it at your risk. And
Yeah, it's
so
exactly.
there was a study, I think, what was it? I think it was 16, 17. I think it was a 17 study. They took 100. 50% of the products has a stated amount of CBD, and then there was a 30% that was way above, and then there's 20% that had a lot less.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also some contaminants. The bottom line is, right now, you cannot say with any degree of certainty, unless you have a COA, that what you're getting is exactly what is labeled. So that speaks to the fact that you gotta have, in order to have longevity, meaning a good reputation going forward, you got to make sure you get a good COA.
So that brings up a good point also, in terms of my job. The one thing that I can advise people on is if it doesn't have a COA or a QR code attached to it, my best advice is stay far away from it to begin with. You have no idea what you're getting. And then step 2 is, if it does have one, you have to know what that means when you're reading it. Right. Doesn't mean it's real just because you have one, right? It could, Lord knows what it could say on there.
And
As long as it says Santa Labs. It's not a commercial.
And again, guys,
thank you.
a lot of times you don't know, and all you can do is just rely on word of mouth and reputation. And this is what we're so new as an industry that a lot of times there is no long-term track record, right? You don't have a GlaxoSmithKline or a Pfizer to say, well, yeah, what they say is probably true, but this is the opportunity as well for people like these folks to make sure that, like Michael and Israel, to make sure that they get their best foot forward and set the industry in the right path.
See, for us on site, on our extraction facility, we have HPLC machine, which allows us to check for at least purity, potency, and whatnot, like other cannabinoids. So even before we send our products out for a third-party lab, we run it through our own analytics. So we have a better idea what to expect. So whenever we get a result from a third-party lab that is not really matching what we did, we send it to a couple more, and we try to make sure that what we're doing aligns with what they can tell us. Because if not, then how can you trust the third-party lab if they're just trying to make money off of your products, really?
Yes, sir.
And to your point, there's good labs and there's bad labs. So, I mean, it's just like anything else. So that's a good idea what you're saying. But a couple of comments and then numbers that you can look at this product and this COA you can match. Because sometimes you get a COA that's 1 or 2 years old, and I'm like, that means nothing to me at this point. It doesn't correspond to this batch. So the good companies will actually do batch-specific COAs. And to your point earlier about the easiest way, when people smoke weed or whatnot, they decarboxylate it by smoking, by heating it up, and that's what they're doing. But they're doing it in a, much more control process as opposed to just rolling it up, smoking it. Nanotechnology. So if I heard you correctly on the nanotechnology, I think has a role. I'm not sure what the role is yet as well. I'm a pharmacist. I know all about the drug-drug interactions. They're very important. And that 20 milligram per kilogram dose, for most people that are about 150 pounds, that's equal to about 1,500 milligrams a day. I don't know very many people that take 1,500 milligrams a day or 3,000 milligrams a day, based on that study.
That's why it only costs $15,000 a year to take that drug.
That's right. So, and you know, you can overdose on Tylenol, you can overdose on aspirin, and you can overdose on Motrin, but you can't overdose on CBD at this point. A lethal dose has not been established, but you can get sick. You know, just like anything else, it's within moderation.
And I'll just add to that real quick. The best guess for LD50, these are those 50%, that will kill 50% of the people at 150 pounds, give or take, is about 15 grams, 15,000 milligrams. Yeah, I think I mentioned that last time, and
Yeah.
that's a lot of, you really gotta really want to hurt yourself.
That's
And
15
even then-
1 gram.
And when
And
you
even
talk
then,
about
you won't die half the time.
That's right.
and when you talk about getting sick, for example, if you're talking about hyperemesis,
Right.
IV hydration in a warm shower
Yep.
is not a deterrent for someone to not end up in that same spot again.
Right.
And it really isn't, which is good news and bad news.
Correct.
Yeah.
But on the nanotechnology, okay, the liver is a filter for the blood, for the body. It cleanses the body. So if I understand you correctly, you say you can bypass that first pass effect by the nanotechnology?
Yeah, we have data to substantiate that. And in general, nanotechnology, certain nanoparticles can
Actually,
bypass the
Speaking
liver.
of which, so you're a pharmacist, I think that's good. So one way to bypass the first pass liver effect is through sublingual formulations.
Correct.
So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, while sublingual has been proven to be an efficacious route of administration, I mean, if you look at how the FDA regulates dietary supplements and look at how DSHEA regulates dietary supplements, sublingual will be qualified as a drug product. So therefore, like when we work with clients, we don't ever recommend a sublingual instructions because that's a drug. If you look at, so DSHEA covers anything that's been administered from your esophagus down to your rectum. So suppositories are covered under the supplements, and that does bypass first pass metabolism. So there are routes of, bypassing the liver, and I married a pharmacist, and she tells me every single day that, like, does that CBD interact with another compound? And we still don't know. I mean, this is why over the 103 clinical studies that are ongoing today, majority of them are drug-drug interaction, and they're trying to understand mechanism of action.
So let's keep going on the rabbit hole, shall we? How about vaping? So you want to talk about going through the bypassing the liver metabolism, the lung is a way to get in there, right? And smoking as well. So
It's not the safest way. It's a good
no,
way, but not the
I
safest
would
way.
not recommend it, right?
Yeah. Your lungs do not cleanse themselves.
is a known, vaping associated lung damage is a well-known effect. Now, it is associated with the vitamin E component, but at the end of the day, not recommended.
So when I come to these conferences, I always learn. And I thought Dr. Chang just said, what about bacon? And I'm like, wow, this is cutting edge.
He's hungry. He's hungry, man. Yes, sir.
Well, I've been hearing that all cannabinoids originate from CBGA and CBD. What medicinal value does CBG by itself have, like without the deep carb process? Like, what is CBGA before?
CBGA is known as the mother of all cannabinoids. So the plant actually basically biologically synthesize CBGA. So that's the first cannabinoid. Like if you even harvest like 6 weeks before your time, you get only CBG because you stop the production of the plant. So CBGA is the mother of all cannabinoids because from there, depending on what kind of synthase or enzyme you have in your plant, you're going to produce either CBDA CBCA or THCA, which are the three major cannabinoids that you can find on hemp, at least. So it is debatable in which stage this happened. Well, it's kind of like well known, but really, that's what I'm saying. Like you get CBGA, and then you can actually get the other three as soon as your plant keeps growing. So once we get the plant already harvested, and for example, on our site, it tests for CBDA. That's how we get the first test of the C of A. It's this much content of CBDA, which if you process it through decarboxylation, you expect that almost 87% of this CBDA gets converted to CBD. And that's chemically a top. You cannot convert more than 87%. And I can go in detail with you about that. But anyway, so you get first CBGA, and then now imagine a plant that somehow doesn't have these enzymes, not the CBD of a biomass of CBGA, which is quite common nowadays. You know, like.
What are the medicinal values of CBGA?
That's a great question. There is so much out there. I mean, it's been reported in some studies that it could be anti-inflammatory, it could be a pain reliever, and so. But then again, all these studies are not necessarily done with a pure form of CBG. Most of the time, they get access of this new cannabinoids while they're on CBD or something like that. So really differentiate what is the exact properties of one cannabinoid is not going to happen until we have enough of these pure products, and then we can do a lot of research with them to really claim, yes, this can do that, and or X, Y.
Anxiety, sleep, and inflammation. But we're not looking at it from a chemistry perspective. We're looking at it from a human response perspective, exactly. And so we're going to do 30-day trials where we'll self-educate individuals how to apply or use what we formulate for them, and then report on a daily or nightly basis the changes that might occur, and then report those findings in large number studies as a starting point. So instead of having an N of 1, we have an N of a couple hundred looking at it. If there's a self-report, we can then, because these will be varied, further. Now, if we think there's real change, then we go back and look at what the formulation was, what might have been the interaction, why it causes. If not, then we move on to another formulation.
So that's a great point, that, and that touches on the clinical side of the sciences, meaning how it applies to human condition. Now, so you mentioned the three things that are near and dear to. That otherwise, we'll just go down the list. Sleep. So, you want to? Yes.
When it comes to sleep, is your study going to give a broad focus, or are you going to consider factors related to dream processing, sleep stage? I know it's a rabbit hole, but it's important to think about that aspect of it because of the importance of your memory reproduction while you're sleeping, your dream, the benefit of having dreams to the natural human it's a lot whenever you get into sleeping, because our bodies go through so much while we're sleeping. So when you want to help with sleep, you don't want to hurt with anything else.
No, that's a great question. So I think the way to answer that, first of all, is there's always external variables that we can't control, and we don't want to control, because we want to have as much normalcy for the individual as possible through the studies. But the real answer is, yeah, over the course of time, we do want to do pre and post testing through sleep studies so that we can measure objectable changes in addition to subjective feedback. Absolutely. That's part of the mechanism that we would look at secondarily if there was a change. Why is it happening? Something that we can actually measure.
So let me tell you what we know. What we do know out there, there's a recent study, literally just came out, I think it's 2018, out of Brazil. They did a small-scale study looking at CBD and its sleep and effect, as you said, on sleep architecture is what you're thinking of, right? Sleep, there's stage 1, 2, 3, 4, deep sleep, REM sleep, right? They found something very interesting. Now, they use a relatively high dose, I believe 5 milligrams per kg. Again, this is all standardized, right? Because when you do research, you gotta make sure you know how much you're giving and what time and all that stuff. They found something very interesting, which is CBD does not seem to alter sleep architecture. Unlike other sedative hypnotics, such as your Ambiens, right, Sonatas, or even tranquilizers like Valium. They all screw up your sleep architecture, okay? Now, that's just the preliminary study. Now, I believe the participants, that was only like 13, 14, so that you can't, the FDA is not going to approve that as a sleep supplement. And I do also believe that the numbers also suggest that the sleep duration was increased by maybe about 30 minutes, which means it probably will work as a sleep aid. But again, can you take that to the bank? And right now is no. But it does seem to at least support the use of CBD as a good effect. And my guess is that you probably have to take it a little bit more than your other doses. Maybe is the suggestion.
Yeah, and so there's another piece that at the end, so certainly there's the self-perception that you survey individuals, and then we do objective measurements, right? Is there more sleep? Is there less, is there uninterrupted sleep, et cetera, et cetera. The real important thing that we're looking at is outcome or performance. So does having better sleep, however that's defined, give you more quality work performance during the day? Or in our case in sports, do you perform better? Do your statistics show for it? In some cases, what we're doing is actually working backwards. So we look at the players that are performing well, and then go back and look at, okay, how much are you sleeping during the night and what quality do you have? And then we compare those to the studies that we have. So we attack you from both ends.
And we're still trying to understand what is the right cannabinoid that induces or encourages sleep. That's still to be determined. And as Dr. Chang, referenced that Brazilian study, there's a positive efficacy or effect for sleep, and is it these other cannabinoids that are potentially more efficacious for sleep? Is it ratios of certain cannabinoids that may induce better sleep? Is it isolates? Is it full spectrums? These performance is an incredible outcome to measure in athletes, and I think we could all perform better with better sleep. Just what is that right cannabinoid and what is the right dose? And without clinical evidence, it's very difficult. CBD, you'll sleep great, because that's liability to everyone's
enormous.
practice.
And the one part that we haven't talked about here much is, as a clinician, the first part is figuring out that the issue is sleep. So before we just start handing everybody out something, try this, maybe this is what's going to work as a cannabinoid, I've got to evaluate you and determine that the reason why you're feeling the way you're feeling could be related to poor sleep.
Yes, sir.
How much does dieting have to do with poor sleep? Or how much does dieting, because I just recently started getting into or practicing fasting and all of that. So I try to fast.
I love that rabbit hole. I love that rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's a whole nother rabbit hole.
Is this a consult? A personal consult?
So, how much does cannabinoid have to do with, your diet? The interaction that the cannabinoids actually have with the ECS? How much healthier is the ECS in the body with the right diet versus...
So I guess I'll take a first stab at it. So number one is, the answer to you is it depends. And it depends on you. what may work for you may not work for anybody else. So that's number one. Now, we can make some generalizations of what seems to work for most people. So with regard to fasting, in general, before your bedtime, the closer that the time frame is, the worse your sleep generally tend to be. So in other words, if you eat at 10 o'clock at night and sleep at 10:30, of most objective measures of sleep, you're going to be a little worse off. And if you throw especially something called alcohol in there, oh boy, you're doing, even though a lot of people take alcohol to go to sleep, even though you think you're sleeping, but you're not sleeping very well. So that's number one. Now, this issue of the endocannabinoid system and all that, so that's obviously a lot less studied, and so nobody really knows for sure. So it takes some degree of experimentation to see how it works for you. And that's kind of the overall gestalt that I could, say. And another thing I would kind of want to say is to also, a lot of times people can kind of think of CBD as a just kind of, it does this or it does it. At the end of the day, I like the concept I like to think about is more of a balance than anything else, just like anything in life, right? It's a balance, and it's not like you give CBD to enhance something, but for all we know, you maybe have too much with it, right? So it's all about balance. And to achieve that balance, sometimes it just takes a lot of trial and error. And the CBD, whatever cannabinoid, is just a way to kind of help you achieve that balance, whatever that is.
So you just brought up a really interesting point. In my world in sports, we have regulating bodies, the NCAA, USADA, WASADA, the drug testing agencies. And in their own documents where cannabinoids are banned, all cannabinoids essentially, and they're starting to slowly back off of this, but in one sense they say these are performance-enhancing drugs, which is why they're banned. But in another sense they said there's no proof that these will actually do anything for you in the same document. And so a lot of this is regulation and education to, I've said this on every panel so far, to allow us to go back and actually perform the studies that need to be studied. Without restrictions.
As far as the scientific community, is there a general consensus as far as which cannabinoid actually helps with the sleep? Or I know you said there's no specific data, but I guess just y'all in particular, do y'all feel, okay, CBD might be that cannabinoid, or is it more that entourage effect that you get a little bit of everything that helps induce that sleep, or that claim for inducing sleep?
I heard a buzz about CBN. I can't prove it, so don't quote me on that.
Yeah, so you want to talk about scientific community? You're going to get a slightly different answer than, let's say, a general community, let's say of, CBD society, right? I mean, you're going to get a little different. So, if you want to talk about just the latest National Academy of Sciences recommendation, that was probably 2017, 16, I don't remember. It's been a few years. It's really just about, and when they talk about cannabinoid, they're really only talking about THC and CBD, that's it. And there is some moderate evidence that it does promote, they're calling it moderate, I believe. So moderate, strong evidence that it does have that effect.
Yeah, I'm hearing what you're hearing in my world is CBN.
And it's
latest and greatest.
Yeah, that's not on the National Academy of Sciences radar yet.
Yeah, it's not.
But dose, so suggested serving size, so dose and time. I mean, if you look at how majority of the consumers, take melatonin to sleep, almost everyone's taking it incorrectly. So if you talk to a physician, a sleep doctor, they will actually give you very different instructions how to consume melatonin. And we're all taking it right before bed when it should be several hours before bed. At least that's what my primary care physician told me. And, if it is CBD, CBD at a certain dose can induce sleep. CBN is a very hot ingredient right now. But I think from a you know how we said earlier that cannabinoids bind to these G-coupled proteins, CB1 and CB2. Like the data suggested that CBN had a preferential binding to the CB1 receptor, which is where THC tends to bind. But recent reports have suggested potentially otherwise. So there's still a lot that we need to understand. It may not be a CBN binding to CB1 receptor that is inducing sleep or more relaxation. There's a lot of research that needs to be done.
Yes, sir.
So my question goes back to the nano emulsification. You know, I understand that you get these things down into micron level. Is there a certain range that is better than others? I mean, you know, probably 10 microns is going to work better than 150, but where is the effectiveness? And the other question is, like, there's all kinds of claims from different vendors about how much more effective their nano process is. A lot of times people say it's proprietary, so you can't ask questions or see the you know, the study that everybody's talking about, but you never see. It's like this urban legend, you know, it's here somewhere. So what's a good range for somebody who wants to put that in the retail store? Because, you know, most of the customers out there, they have no idea. When I talk to them about water solubles, I'm like, just look for the blue bottle. That's all that you got to know. Just, you know, you see a blue bottle, put it in your drink, you know, and yes, you can put this in alcohol. You know, it's like, there's not a good, I don't have a good sense when it says 5 times, 10 times. How do I know what to believe? What's a general rule, you know?
Very good question. And so based on our experience in the industry, and I agree with you that, you know, there are a lot of claims that suggest that if our nano product, you know, provides 10 times, 50 times, I've seen 400 times greater than oil formulations. And, you know, it may very well be the case. You know, if they did the right controlled pharmacokinetic studies, whether it's in mice, rats, monkeys, pigs, or humans, which is preferential, and the data suggests that, then that claim can be substantiated. The challenge in the industry is, you know, it's pretty much self-regulation, you know, at this point. So when the FTC and lawyers start looking at this, which they are going to start enforcing what you say on your bottle. And on the FDA's website, on how all dietary supplements are, you know, there's regulations how to label things, when to say things, when not to say things. You know, you are responsible for everything that you state on your label. So when it regards to size, you know, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. You know, there are numerous papers, not with CBD, but they look at how particle size influences absorption. So there was a paper that looked at a 50 nanometer particle, 100, 150, 200, 400, and 1,000 nanometers, which is now in the micron size. And they're looking at absorption. And you may get, depending on size, you may get benefit of, maybe you get a preferential absorption on a fasted state versus a fed state, and particle size may influence that. From when we formulate, we intentionally formulate slightly above 100 nanometers. And the reason for that is that the FDA defines nanotechnology as anything from 1 to 100 nanometers. And that's what they say is nano. But if you are making, and they also say in that same dossier, is that if it is considered nano, between 1 and 100 nanometers, it's considered to have a different chemical property compared to its oil, you know, parent compound, which means that if you are going to launch a product that is sub 100 nanometers, you know, you are required to file a new dietary ingredient application, which is going to cost you time, money, and that's if the FDA even accepts an NDI code for CBD. And at this point, they do not, because they're not recognizing CBD as a supplement, they're recognizing as a drug. So there's a lot of considerations when it comes to size. Smaller does provide some benefit, maybe some like translucent, more transparent formulations in a beverage. However, there's numerous papers that look at how too small of a nanoparticle can induce aggregation and physical instabilities, whereas the opposite's also true. Looking at too large of nanoparticles can induce negative physical attributes.
One more thing I want to add to that is you have to be careful also with your products, because I came across at least 3 different nano products, not nano emulsions, nano water soluble. That's what they name it, right? Everybody is able to use the word nano for whatever they're doing, as long as they don't claim it's nanotechnology on your emulsion, which it makes it that size. Then a lot of people uses this word as introduction in their product, that nano water soluble. So I open it up, and then I get to see basically isolate floating around in this solution. So it's not well done. It's just a product. But they claim to call it nano. So as soon as anyone in the market reads nano, they click right away that there's something going on in these conversations that is nanotechnology. It doesn't necessarily mean that really is a nano emulsion. So you have to be really careful with your products. I know you understand you have water-soluble products, but then I also got in my hands a powder which it was claimed to be water-soluble, right? And it was also labeled. So then I assumed it might be a nano-emulsion. Then I started testing it, looking at it, and it's just like a powder, right? Like a sugar powder. Then you put it in water, and it's supposed to dissolve in water. It does. But all of a sudden, you have like floaties, like white powder floaties. So then I just figured this is isolate, sugar-coated. So think of an M&M, right? And that's what they're selling. And they claim it's water-soluble because as soon as you put it in water, it looks like it dissolves, so then you drink it. You don't even have enough time to notice if it's going to float, if it's going to separate, nothing. So really, you have to be very careful with the products because there is some nano emulsions out there, but there is some nano fake stuff that it sells, definitely sells. But would it work? I'll question that, you know?
So if I'm a brand owner and I'm purchasing from some of the major suppliers that we see in the industry using 10 nanometers, 25 nanometers, effectively when the FDA makes this a dietary supplement, am I being automatically pulled off the shelf because they haven't submitted any of this data points? And if I'm buying a C of A from one of these major suppliers and they're claiming 10 nanometers, should I be asking them to see that particle size? Because if I'm a brand owner, that means that I can't be on the shelf. And I'm actually violating FDA guidance. Is that correct? Because that's what I see mostly in the industry is the emulsions making claim sets around super small particle sizes, and they said that it absorbs better, but does that mean that I'm actually compliant, or is my product not even allowed?
It's a great question, and this is where we very much encourage every one of you guys to do your scientific due diligence when working with another supplier, and ask questions. Ask to see these C of A's, and if they are claiming nano, which is an FTC label claim, look for particle size and ask for particle size. If you look at all the labs in the country that's doing CBD testing, a fraction of them actually have particle sizers. Less than almost all of them but one knows how to use a particle sizer. So this is where we have a particle sizer if you guys need to know nano particle size. However, it's the discussion, and it should never be a one-way discussion. As soon as you start feeling it's that way, or you're forced to sign non-disclosure agreements to just know what you're buying, that should be a red flag. And transparency is important, ingredient selection is important, and
scientific field, everything's nano from 1 nanometer to 999 nanometers. Now, FDA claims it's only in that range, which is okay. I worked with nanoparticles too in the past, and we used to claim that same thing. As long as it's between 1 and 100, you can call it nano. When it goes above that, then you can start saying like 0.1 microns or 0.2 microns, 0.3 microns, and that's it. So it's a differentiation between that range and a larger size. So, like I said, technically speaking, you can definitely call it nano, even if it's like, 700 nanometers. But really, is it working as you would expect it to work? There's a lot of education also on this new technology because very few of us have like embark into this new technology, and then again, we have you all asking questions. Well, how do we know it really is nano? Is it more effective? Would it bypass the liver? So all these questions, we need to start like putting it out there and really getting people like final users to understand how can they use this instead of just a tincture, for example, or an edible. So they can probably use this type of new technology for their studies with athletes, for example, and have a better outcome just because they know now a good way to control dosage with this type of technology now.
All right, well, it looks like everybody's practicing some fasting because we're definitely gotten into the lunch hour. It's great that everybody's enthusiastic, asking questions. I think, we'll be happy to take some questions after this, but I know we've kind of gone over some of over time. But appreciate everyone, and hopefully everyone got something out of this scientific discussion. And if any questions, come and curbside us.
Thank you.